appreciate everyone choosing to share your time with me today. My name is Daphna Aronson. I am the founder of Be Sports Minded. I am a sports psych consultant and performance analytics expert. So often when we think of sports analytics, we're considering new ways to identify and slice the data that's like that found on the back of a trading card. And I'm focused on what's on the front, who that person is, and understanding if, why, and how they will be successful in a given environment. Today I'm going to share with you some results from my machine learning platform that allows you to identify the intangibles without ever needing to administer an assessment. It will tie directly to business outcomes, and the competitive advantage in this case is giving your scouts an edge and a leg up in the work that they do. KPMG valued Manu at $3.8 billion, not the least of which goes into understanding and identifying the talent and the coaches for the team. A common refrain in Premier League and also in MSL is we've got so much data right now, we really have to understand how to better sift through the noise. So often, off the field, those intangibles gets overlooked if measured at all. Major League Baseball is arguably the Nike of sports analytics, yet it continues to find itself in the hole when it comes to understanding and tying the behavior and the personalities of their athletes to any real business outcomes and driving decisions. Consider first-round draft picks of the NFL, 78% of them might make it on the field. 20% end up staying in the league for 10 years or are starters for 5. A common refrain from those GMs is we lose 3 things that we can't recover with those draft busts. The first is the time that the scouts spend on those athletes. And while there are resources and monies associated with that, it's not always hitting the salary cap. However, that's the second thing. Right now you've given money to this player who's not producing and it's hitting your salary cap, and that's not available to you for other acquisitions and trades. And the third is the value of that draft that could have gone to somebody who was going to produce for you. The NCAA has been on this precipitous rise in the recruiting expenditures. Just from fiscal year 18 to 19, the Power 5 NCAA football teams have increased the recruiting by $103,500. So that's taken a team like Georgia over the $3.6 million mark, while at the other end you've got teams like Wisconsin who continue to do more with less. Similarly, on the basketball side, the average increase from fiscal year 18 to 19 was $57,000, with the SEC leading most of that charge. Consider that a late first-round draft pick in the NHL is actually closer in value to a third-round draft pick than he is to one of the first 5. So you're seeing also a very similar range in investment in scouts in the NHL teams. You've got teams who are heavily invested in advanced technologies and have 22 scouts to work with. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have teams that are working with under 10 scouts and are relying on shared resources. And finally, the NBA. In 2019-2020, they gave about $123.5 million secured to salaries, with accumulated about $50 million to drafts after the 10th round. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of emphasis going out in there, but there's a problem. The problem is we're not looking at the qualitative who these players are, and there are reasons why, and these are the 3 reasons in my research that I've discovered. You've got false positives coming from the current assessments and technologies that are out there now. So it's monkey see, monkey do adoption, right? One team has it, so now you want to have it for your team too. It's not reliable predictive analytics that can tie to any real business outcome. And you're also understanding that there's gaming. A lot of it is reliant on self-reporting, and that self-reporting, these athletes are sitting across from you, or they're taking these assessments, they already know what the answers are, they know how they're supposed to answer it. Similarly, on the interview side, there's just unconscious bias and bias that's going into how the answers are being reported. When we talk about unreliable psychometrics, we're looking at the field in general. The research has demonstrated that, yes, in the past, we currently rely on self-reporting, but self-reporting really lacks internal validity, and it has a lot of bias inherently. So It's because it was the only thing we had up until this point that we're using it, but it's not really a reliable tool. And systemic inefficiencies, what we're talking about here is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we often miss it because we're too busy looking at the big picture. So that's considering the different levels of skills in your scouts, understanding if you're all on the same page when it comes to what you're identifying, the definition of those character traits, and really the consistency of your reporting metrics. So what that leads to is selecting certain players whose personalities aren't really understood, identified, or assessed, and so their performance profiles allow overlooking those red flags. Instead, we'd love to understand how we can better identify these late-round draft picks who completely exceeded expectations on any of their scouting reports and their draft round. So if we're saying that the self-reporting interviews aren't great, but we still really think that there's value in understanding who athletes are as people, how are we going to do this? And that's where machine learning comes in. So machine learning is a sublayer of AI. It's where machines actually learn to problem solve themselves. And I think this is sort of why we got into this catchy phrase of predictive analytics. In this case, we're using natural language and IBM Watson Glaser technology to scrape the internet for any written or spoken words by the athletes. That's by the athletes, not about the athletes from other people. And it reveals the personality traits based on the big 5 personality traits. The acronym is OCEAN. It's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. That's the field standard. If you're using AIQ, if you're using an NEO, if you're using PI, all of that filters up into these 5 standards that is stable from the age of 12. So even if you're out there recruiting younger athletes and you're determined that you can accentuate their performance over time, but you're not really sure because their brains aren't developed yet if they're really going to be able to express these character traits and keep motivated and not become complacent and handle the adversity, this is the way to go. It also gives us back their problem-solving capability as well as a culture map. IBM Watson Glaser, natural language, those are technologies available to everybody. That's not patentable. What we have patent pending are the neurotransmitters between the algorithms that yield more precise results, as well as the problem solving and the culture map. So what we're seeing here is if you have your talent pool, and each dot represents one of the athletes that you're interested in looking at, right, just going through the machine learning platform immediately reduces the number of athletes that your scouts have to target. So right away, you're not only gaining that time back, you're actually adding time for expediting their outreach and actually targeting players that matter so they can actually learn more about them and get the right amount of data about their qualitative and quantitative expertise. Now, that's just on the machine learning. If you now incorporate with some of the amazing R&D applications, whether it's models that you've built internally or you're using one of the solution providers outside, you can actually go even deeper to say, all right, who are real franchise players? And in these later rounds where it barely seems like there's a needle left in the haystack to explore, who might be a culture add and have the ability to actually exceed the expectations from those scouting reports. So here's a demonstration of the technology live using user input. What we did was actually create the benchmarks off of the GOATs throughout the sports, male and female. And what's awesome about the technology is that it doesn't see gender, race, age, education. So it completely is inclusive. It takes out that diversity measure. And it allows you to filter on either what you want the standards to be or what are the benchmarks that are currently out there. So when we looked at the GOATs, we found a remarkable consistency in their personality, and it was all driven by a desire to be great from an internal drive, not because of accolades of the crowd. And so we were asked to give a quality assurance test to a major league team, and they wanted to see where they were against their benchmarks. So we took their team and we mapped them against their, the baseball benchmarks, the total benchmarks, and also broke their team out into their major leagues, their minors, and then the people that they had recently let go. And what's nice about this is it's a great starting point to understand if you're even in the right path, if there are areas that you need to explore further, and where there might be some bright spots that you can further enhance. We also ended up benchmarking them against 2 other teams that they thought had the representation of a talent identification that they would like to be measured against. So what are some of the business outcomes that we can immediately tie to? And one is when you have debiased qualitative metrics, you can immediately decide, you can eliminate 55%. In this case, we eliminated 55% off the top. So right away, you're targeting players that are more specifically going to be culture adds to your environment, but also have those character traits. And every team sort of uses different words. Some of them mean the same thing, some of them mean something differently. But this was able to identify for them, just based on the machine platform alone, not bringing in any performance statistics, who would be real solid picks for their environment. There was a set of outliers, and there's a graph there in a little bit that we'll get to, that help identify, okay, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so what do we do with all the people that sort of aggregate to a common average? The second thing that we looked at was we zoomed in and looked at a risk analysis. So if you're going to make a multi-million-dollar investment and someone could say, hey, let me make the reliability of that bet even better and reduce the risk on it, would you take that investment? And I think the answer for all of us would be yes. And so this is what that helps to do. In this case, the question was, hey, we've got 2 players that we're considering acquiring. Their performances, the strengths and weaknesses sort of net out. What can you tell us about them? And so what we're doing here is we're identifying for them the risk of bringing, not just comparing them, but the risk of bringing them into the environment so that they may prescriptively decide to have plans in place before things happen, or they can choose and say, you know what, this guy has some significant strengths. Let's identify what those strengths are and apply them intelligently internally to build things like teammateness, leadership, and really start to understand, how they can make the value of the acquisition greater than just the performance. The behavioral comparison, the edge here is really understanding your team holistically and understanding the network between the personalities of your team. So if you're looking at the dark blue bar and that represents the coach or coordinator that's responsible for the others, now you're able to understand and hone in on what's working, why we're building team chemistry, and how we can actually find things that are going great and apply them elsewhere, or understand if we're going to bring players in, how that might impact this balance. And it's totally understood that for a team or for a league like baseball, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more complex. So this is looking at different roles within that team and the coaches and coordinators as well. And it's also important when you're thinking about, like in the NHL, your forwards, right, and how they work together, and the idea of when you're moving players up and down a lot, really where the impact is and where you're going to feel it, and understanding how to address it before things happen, before someone starts to have an issue with pressure, have an issue with adversity, have an issue with a teammate. So when we're looking at the outliers, the fear is that you're going to mislabel talent or that you're going to miss it altogether. So what we did here is we took the players that for them looked like they were all in the same bunch, and we mapped out their personality profiles. And what we're able to understand here is who are the players that are going to be a culture add, not a culture fit, because that's not necessarily what you want, but who's going to be able to come in and not only contribute, but also gain and learn. So the idea of someone having that competitive will, the idea of someone being able to compete for the whole game, those are things that are really difficult to assess just when you're looking at performance and when you see them coinciding with so many other people. So what we're able to do here is really demonstrate statistically, where their personalities will emerge in those areas, and understand from a labor economic perspective if it's going to transfer internally. So, You can be great in the minors, or are you going to be great in the majors? You can be great in college. Is that going to translate into the professional level? You can be amazing in New York. Does that mean you're going to be equally successful in Florida? So at the end of the day, we are building a platform for scouts that incorporates and takes into account all of the data feeds that's available that the team wants to include, not just the machine learning platform. So that when they're out in the field, they can receive real-time AI feedback that encourages them to look for those data gaps and go out and ask those right questions. We develop a qualitative interview and the questions, not to take over what they're doing, but just to suggest and identify ways of asking questions differently and to get a story told versus just receiving an answer. And finally, it's looking at real-time data. So it's not something that you're processing and having to go back out in the field for. You can do it then once you process your data, once you input data. Some of the fields are standard, it's semi-structured, so that we can sort of get that low-hanging fruit of data consistency, reliability, and having a longitudinal data set that has value. In the future, what we'd like to bake in is understanding that there's the physical, there's the psychological, but there's also the neurotransmitters for athletes that fire those nanoseconds faster. And they can make decisions faster, they're the right decisions, and they do it better than their competitors. And what's out there now, there's some really nice tools, but similar to some of the assessments, it's not completely recreating the environment. So you're missing some of the triggers of the external and internal variations that create anxiety, that create dealing with the pressure, that create that true environment of being under pressure in the moment. So we are exploring some ways to take that out of the equation as well. And finally, understanding the character traits that have ended athletes' careers early. So in this case, it's not necessarily looking to throw data out there to, throw another star in the sky and say, hey, can you still find the constellation? That's more of like a research opportunity to see like if that makes sense to even include, if it's a strong signal or if it's going to be just noisy and it's interesting to think about. At the end of the day, the complete data set is really trying to create one nice big North Star. So when we're looking at what we're achieving from building in machine learning on the qualitative side is being able to identify in advance, target, put your resources where they count, and also internal resources, align them so that they can actually be prepared and do things on a preventative versus reactive nature. So at the end of the day, when we take a look at both the front and the back of the baseball card, we're not only providing insights and business outcomes for the team, we're looking at how do we look at players holistically as people. And by addressing them as people, you're going to be able to understand what are their motivators and how to consistently solicit the best maximum performance throughout their careers, and not just in the moment because they happen to be the hot player. We have time for questions. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, we gotta get the mic.
Thank you, Daphna. That was great. You mentioned that your model's built using words spoken or written from the players. So how do you account for differing kind of data sets across players? Because some are more vocal than others, or they are in a bigger market with more exposure.
No, it's a great question. So there's a couple questions in there. And the first is the technologies have actually gone through enough data sets where it's not about what's said, it's how it's said and how it's written. So it's analyzing and creating the validity across there. And we only need 300 words, 300 to 600 words spoken. So it's that reliable. In the case where there are athletes that may not have social media accounts, because it's all public information, we're not, one thing I should mention from a data privacy and ethical perspective, this isn't about going and fishing out things that are in a private account. This is all public access. So if there are athletes that are not on social media or haven't written a bunch, we engage with them via text. and just asking a few questions, and it's very simple to get those words. And it doesn't even have to be me. It's really internal to the team, so it's a natural progression of their interaction with the team. Yeah. We have a question here.
Have you guys found that written versus, or there's a difference between written versus spoken words in terms of how effectively your algorithm or your model can characterize like the different personality types?
If I understand correctly, are you asking, is there a difference between if we look at only written versus only spoken?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, they've been measured and they've been vetted the same. So we don't go and look for something specific. We could get 12,000 words for one person and 500 words for another, and it's going to be the same. There's one question over here.
Sorry to make you come here. Thank you so much. I had a question about the point of culture add rather than culture fit, and was curious about how you think through, is there like an optimal makeup of a team? Are there certain traits where all of the team members should be aligned versus other traits where it's better to have like a diversity in how you measure that?
That's a great question. I'm not really in the business of determining that for teams. I don't think I'm the best person. I don't think anyone from the outside is. I think that's GMs, that's owners, that's people determining the culture and understanding what the behaviors are. To me, culture is about virtues, it's behaviors, it's not just values. So if they're able to identify what those behaviors are, I can help them identify the athletes who have the tendencies for those behaviors or already exhibit them, and those who may not but actually have the potential to. So no, I haven't done any studies on that. I think as people evolve, as the game evolves, it's not necessary. It's a moving target. I have one question here. I should say that while we're getting the mic there, that the machine learning platform was leveraged from a corporate platform that was used for Fortune 500 companies for their CEO succession planning. So I've just spent like the last few years really maximizing it and making it adaptable for the sports environment 'cause it's a bit different.
So you talked about making sure there aren't explicit biases in terms of player selection, but there's a popular anecdote of a tech company writing a similar algorithm to identify who would be the best engineers, and it ended up selecting one demographic segment. Have you looked into that? Any risk of that happening in your own models?
So if there's one benchmark and just sticking to that benchmark?
Basically, yeah. So they were looking to say who's the best performers, and then it ended up being that it had an implicit bias towards one segment of the demographic.
So then looking at if it's a specific race or gender or something. That's a great question. No, haven't had that problem. I think sports does not suffer from, or certain sports don't suffer from a lack of diversity. But what's interesting and what I am looking to do in the forward case studies is look at the data aggregated and understand if we can take the contextual environment and relationships and those influences and see trends there. So for example, to that point a little bit, players who come from overseas in Major League Baseball, they work hard, they bust their butt. However, there is a noticeable pattern of once they arrive, that they become complacent. It's a harsh generalization. I wouldn't say that's a majority by any means, but it's something that the teams have identified and want to understand better. So that's something that I would dive into, taking a pain point and understanding if we can really see reliable things that demonstrate it. But it really, really involves the social context as well. And that's why this is great, but building out the full qualitative model of understanding how these traits represent themselves and can express themselves in an environment is really, really important. One last question.
Just wondering how you handle possible discrepancies between your publicly available data that you're using to create these profiles for people that might have their publicly available data managed versus when you have a private interview with them and you're getting hopefully an unscripted answer from them.
Fair question. I think it's going to be more and more critical as people start to understand that their social profiles are being looked at. One is there's really not that much of a variation. However, we can instantaneously identify and get their 300 words once they're on the inside. I mean, they're not going to be drafted or chosen without some sort of verbal conversation. And that's when, again, it's the quality of that conversation and how they're answering their questions that we can validate it against. Right now, because I actually think it's happening now, I have not noticed that there's a variance. I'm not naive to the fact that that might change. So we're definitely working with organizations that are interested to do like reiterations and not just rely on like the first thing that comes out. And I think the second piece to that is there are athletes that have fake accounts and then they're real accounts. So it becomes more relevant and important to take it from the direct contact with the team themselves versus necessarily just the public available data. I have one question here.
Hello. I'd like to ask if you are taking context into account when you're running your algorithm. For example, some statements may come after a big win, a good individual performance. Mm-hmm. This is the one part, and the other, if you're taking into account silence after maybe a bad performance or a bad team game.
It's a great question. The context is derived not just from the sports questions. It's not just from what they're saying after a game. It's throughout. It's who they are as people, as individuals. So even in that way, the natural language and IBM Watson has looked at the relationship between the words being used to determine if this is an extroverted, introverted context, and be able to look at the rest of the ocean profiles. I'm available if anyone wants to continue any parts of the conversation afterwards. I can be reached at daphna@besportsminded.com. I genuinely appreciate everyone being here and all of these really insightful, important questions. There were 2 recent studies that were just published. One was republished in Bloomberg Businessweek, and it was Australian researchers who looked at over 3,500 job fields and looked at the personality types that were in these job fields. And they noticed a remarkable consistency with the people in those jobs and their personalities. Their future state is to actually now go and look at the high performers in those jobs and understand from an employee perspective, if you have certain personality traits, where you might be able to transfer that skills between roles. So it's similar, it's happening, it's starting to be understood and identified. And the second real quick one is out of USC School of Medicine. Dr. Saxon just finished a really comprehensive study with the Marine Corps', their Green Beret and Black Berets. So this is like hardcore training, 25 volunteers, half of them get eliminated. And that half that gets eliminated, let's say it's 17, you've got half of those people who voluntarily quit. She looked at everything from nutrition to sleep to hydration to the physical to the mental. The only predictor that she could find of them selectively leaving was their personality. With 70% accuracy, she could do it. So while this seems sort of extreme and out there, because of machine learning, we're able to do it well. I think there's really good questions about how people are doing it, and that makes a huge difference, and if they're doing it ethically, of course. So thank you for your time.